I'm going to go ahead with the meeting beginning ritual.
起立，面向佛堂，参加三鞠躬、一鞠躬、再鞠躬、三鞠躬，参加各位点传是一鞠躬，开班一鞠躬，请坐下。Please be seated.
Part of the reason that we do this is because the things that Derek and I speak about, we believe to be of relative importance to the spiritual well-being and development of the people that come and listen to us. And our number one concern in putting on this study group is to help people to find that better set of answers in their lives, to find where it's appropriate that path of personal and spiritual growth that helps lead them in their lives to a perspective of happiness and fulfillment and joy and peace, and so that people can have an enjoyable and what they consider to be a worthwhile life. This isn't even so much a thing about what happens to us in the afterlife. This is all present moment, right now, in our current lives and existences, teachings on how to make things smoother, easier, and more pleasant. And as we go forward with those teachings, we sincerely hope that the teachings also aid us, in the resolution of negative karma and in a positive afterlife situation, whatever that turns out to be. I try not to impose too much of my own image onto what I think happens when we die, because quite frankly, that's a remarkably personal thing, and I absolutely don't have a corner on the market for what the truth is when that event occurs. I only know what I believe. But still, part of the purpose of a spiritual path is to kind of help to deal with the possibilities that exist at the end of this existence. And we'd really like for y'all to be able to hear us without having to have the meeting interrupted semi-regularly because of audio difficulties. And so, Derek and I work pretty hard to try to come up with solutions to these things. And I'd like to thank Mark and Derek and everybody for not only hanging in there as we get some of this stuff resolved, but for the suggestions that lead to the resolutions. Last week, I started to talk to you guys about becoming. It's a little teeny tiny word. Becoming is not a long word with tons of impact. Most of the time, it's not even a word that we consider too terribly much. We use it as a conjunction most frequently. And yet, in the context of the Guandao and in the teachings of Tai Chi Chuan by Zhan Feng, becoming is what life is all about. All of a sudden, that little tiny word has tremendous impact and import, and it becomes not only the conjunction, but the very thing that we are. What are we? We are becoming. And I'm going through that process with you. I'm just at a slightly different place than some other folks are. And I suppose, having had yet a few additional days to consider this talk, one of the things that we need to be mindful of is that not everybody within the scope of our reach is at the same place at the same time in their spiritual journey. We all start where we are and we all get to where we're going, but that doesn't always occur at the same rate or at the same time. There are some remarkably common teachings in both the Wandao and Taiji Chuan practices. And please understand that I'm not speaking of martial sciences practices in the westernized, sanitized, chain school context that can be found virtually anywhere in this country these days, because those environments have removed anything that's even remotely controversial from their curricula. In all of the ancient martial practices, personal and spiritual development was always considered the most important aspect of martial training. It was never strictly an education designed to teach somebody how to beat somebody else senseless. And none of the masters of old on any continent would instruct a person simply in how to do that. If all a person wanted to do was learn to beat somebody else senseless, they could enter the military, or they could go pick a stick up, wander into a bar somewhere, and smack somebody in the head with it, and sooner or later they'd learn to fight. Abandoning the personal and spiritual development goals of the martial sciences practices has created a philosophy in this country of well, for lack of a better analogous term, think of the Power Rangers, where nobody ever really gets hurt, nobody ever really gets killed, nobody bleeds. The martial sciences practices are actually acrobatics. The opponents are artificial, and there aren't any consequences. That's just not how life works, guys. It just isn't. And there is no real development of the characters that occurs in those shows and movies that goes beyond, breaking half a dozen bricks or tearing up some rubberized costume, the monster somewhere. And for that reason, my children were always forbidden to watch those shows, because that treatment of martial sciences practice I find to be absolutely abhorrent. I just can't tolerate it. I can't even sit still for it. I've spent my entire life learning how to do it the right way. I refuse to participate in watching it be done the wrong way. So why is this so doggone important? Well, and Lao Tzu understood this as much as Zhang Songfeng did, and perhaps even more from a spiritual perspective. There is a process of reduction, of elimination, of uncluttering that has to occur in order to master martial sciences practices or life, either one. Without that process of reduction, nothing gets simplified, nothing really advances, because we drag around with us all of the trappings of the past trying to move into the future. And that's a lot of weight to try to carry. And so in both sets of disciplines, we hear an awful lot about the reduction and moderation of desires and attachments. And wherever possible, about the elimination of the attachments in our lives, and the very careful and wise choosing of the attachments that we want to keep. The reason for that is because all of our desires and attachments eventually will bring us suffering. That doesn't mean they're necessarily bad or evil, but it is the truth that one day the things that we're attached to will cause us to suffer. Okay? The example that I use most frequently to illustrate that point is the attachment that I have to my wife and my children. That is an attachment I absolutely intend to keep. I'm not going to abandon it. That's a choice. It's nobody's holding a gun to my head, but still, I refuse to abandon that attachment. I love my wife and children very much. But one of these days, that attachment is going to cause us all suffering. One of these days, I'm going to die. This physical body that's sitting here in front of my computer speaking to you right now is going to cease to exist. Probably, hopefully, much sooner than my wife or children will die. Um, I've lost one child already, and that just isn't the way nature is supposed to work. Okay. And when that event occurs, my family is going to be very sad for a period of some time, hopefully not too long. I keep telling them to give me my 15 minutes of grief and go get on with living. Whether or not they'll actually take that advice is subject to some debate. But the fact is, when I pass, they're going to suffer. Why? Because of that attachment. So if we're going to be attached to something in our lives, it ought to be something that's worth suffering a bit for. I certainly don't see maintaining an attachment like that to my car, for instance. As far as I'm concerned, my car can burn to the ground tomorrow, and I'm not going to lose any sleep over it. I'll go get another car. House and all the stuff in the house, yeah, that would be a bit of an inconvenience if it burnt to the ground, but it wouldn't cause me a spiritual crisis. It'd just be a horrendous hassle for a few days. But once again, we'd go find somewhere to live, right? The things that I'm attached to, the the things that I really feel the need to keep, my family, my health, my relationships, my friendships, those things are the things that are important to maintain. And those I'm pretty jealous about maintaining. There's a lot of discussion also about reducing the ego self, about taking the emotions and the need to be right, the need to impose our will on others, all of those sorts of things out of our lives. Because those needs get us into trouble. They make the path of our life bumpy and rough and difficult to traverse. And so anywhere we can take our ego out of the conduct of our lives, we improve it. Anywhere where we can moderate extremes of emotional stress, we improve our lives. In the practice of the martial sciences, those two particular reductions are extremely important unless we want to be led by our negative emotions into a continual conflict. Quite frankly, I'd rather not. When I talk to people about walking this particular path, this path of becoming, when they first consider starting, I always ask a couple of questions, particularly if they're wanting to enter the Tai Chi school, because on Saturday I do teach combat. I teach the martial applications of Tai Chi Chuan, and those applications are effective and dangerous. And so I'm careful about who I pass that knowledge to. And the first question I always start with is what is it you're looking for? What do you want to get out of this training? What are you hoping that your participation in this training is going to provide you? And I'm always really interested in the answer. The thing that I found over the years is that everyone comes into the training for one reason or another, but the reasons are always different and the reasons are always unique to a person's situation. Obviously, what I'm looking for is somebody who wants me to try to turn him into Bruce Lee inside of a month, because I just plain can't do that. I wouldn't do it if I could. And there are a lot of people here in the West that would very much like for that to happen. But that'd be a mistake, even if it were possible. I ask people what they're hoping to gain from the practice. And what I'm always hoping to hear from them is spiritual advancement, better health, flexibility, strength, a different perspective on living, something along those lines. Most of the time I get something that has to do with self-defense. In a couple of cases, especially amongst the core group of my Saturday students, I've had a number of people whose responses had to do with spiritual growth, and those folks I pour my heart and soul into. It isn't that I ignore the others, but the people that come into the school looking to complete their spiritual path, I pay particular attention to, because I believe that path is so very important. The other folks, I make sure at least encounter the opportunity. It's a requirement. Then I ask them what they're willing to put into this practice. What are they willing to give to have the knowledge that they're asking me for? What are they willing to do for it? Because once again, an awful lot of people that show up at the front door, want me to turn them into Bruce Lee inside of a month. And interestingly enough, they don't want to do anything to get there. That doesn't work. I learned very early on when I very first started teaching the general public that people will line up all day at your front door to let you work for them for nothing. They'll take advantage of you every time they get the opportunity, if you allow that to occur. I no longer allow that to occur. I don't charge money for teaching people, but I absolutely insist that they follow the right set of rules if I'm going to teach them. That's my price, and it's non-negotiable. I ask them what they're willing to give. That's not the same question as what they're willing to put into their practice. I want to see if the people that are coming to me have a sense of compassion, a sense of empathy, at least the beginning buds of a desire to help other people, to put someone else's situation ahead of their own. Now, the answer to these questions doesn't necessarily keep somebody out of the school. The only thing I won't do is purely train somebody to fight. But it does give me a pretty good idea for where these folks think they're headed on both their life journey and their spiritual journey. And it provides me with an opportunity to try to help them to get there. Those are questions that are well asked of ourselves fairly frequently on both the One Dao path and the martial path. And I see there we go. I've contemplated this talk, and in particular the topics that I chose to put in here heavily over the last few weeks, and specifically for the next couple of slides, because this is a picture into my life, the only life that I can truly describe for you with accuracy. Yeah, for myself, even after doing this for the better part of my entire life, I still every now and again look at myself in the mirror and ask myself what I'm going to turn out to be when I grow up. What is it that I'm hoping to become? And the reason that I do that is because I can look back over the span of my life and see the milestones in the past where my decisions and choices and actions have changed the course of my life dramatically. And I find that study both fascinating and sometimes a little disturbing, because there have been times in my past where I've done things that later on I had to admit were unbelievably stupid, or not so much in my own best interests. And then I remind myself of the path of everybody that wanders into my school. when we're beginners in the practice of Tai Chi, you know, and everybody looks the same on day one. I looked exactly like this on day one. In fact, I fell down 3 times in front of Master Wong. When we first start, our movements are all big and clumsy, and the circles that we make as we're trying to learn how to execute the form properly and use the techniques correctly are big and ungainly, and they're not very precise, and they're not very quick, and they're not very effective. And our steps are awkward and unsure because we're trying to learn how to make our bodies do what our bodies do not do naturally. But over time, usually over a couple of years, about 2 years, 18 months to 2 years, something miraculous happens, and the 108 steps of the form become natural, almost easy, sometimes beautiful, and the circles begin to become smaller, and the techniques become more precise, and the understanding of what they do begins to bud and grow and emerge. And what happens is that what started out as perhaps one of the most ungainly, ugly things in the world to watch is all of a sudden becoming a real martial practice. And as that occurs, you'd swear starting out that you'd never get there, and yet everybody that sticks with it for a little while does. Life works just like that. If we are going to become the spiritual beings that we want to be, we have to start somewhere. And typically, where we're going to start is going to be a bit ungainly, a little awkward, and not terribly precise. But the longer we practice, the more effort we put into the discipline, the more we are prepared to unclutter and unattach our lives, the more refined that practice becomes until it appears natural. And with a little more time and a little more practice, it goes from looking natural to being natural. My reflexes are blindingly quick. I wouldn't brag to you for anything, and I don't spend much time talking about stuff like this. But every one of my students will tell you I can hit them 3 times before they can blink. I can be behind them before they can move. Why? Because I practiced, and I've practiced long and hard for well over 30 years. This stuff for me is a part of my being. It is as natural to me as breathing. And for as long as a person practices, that's what happens. That is the process that I am undergoing as well in my Dao practice, in the practice of my spirituality. I did not come into the Taoist teachings at a young age. When I first started looking for answers, the answers just plain didn't exist here in scenic downtown Indiana. And so it wasn't until much later in my life that I actually bumped into Derek almost by accident on the old MSN forums. The first time he and I ever spoke, it was a conference call that was done on a landline, a copper wired landline telephone, because smartphones didn't exist. Been a long time ago. And it was that chance meeting that transformed my life. Believe it or not, you know, a total of 40 years of martial training hasn't done for me what, 10 or 15 years of being involved in the Yuan Dao has, because the focus is, fairly different. But who'd have thought back in 1997 that it would have had that kind of an impact on me? I certainly didn't know that at the time. really pretty cool looking backwards. So what am I becoming now? Well, in the last 10 or 15 years, however long it's been, more peaceful and calm. And Derek will remember that, I absolutely guarantee you. He's had the rather unique opportunity to observe my spiritual evolution from the spectator's seat and that of most helpful mentor. So he can comment on things that I'm probably not even aware of. I am much more mindful of the present moment, much more engaged and involved in what's going on right now, instead of agonizing over the past or worrying about the future. Interestingly, I'm a lot less concerned with the thoughts and opinions of others. These days, I don't really care what somebody else thinks about my particular path or my life. They don't have to live it. It doesn't mean that I'm not compassionate, empathetic, or that I'm mean to them. I'm absolutely not. But I don't allow somebody else's thoughts and opinions to change the direction that my life goes. I am much more internal. And that is in all of the contexts that are present in this talk. Tai Chi Chuan is an internal martial science. Without the internal understanding, there is absolutely no mastering Tai Chi. And the Guandao practices are an internal practice. Each individual has to learn to apply the teachings and use them, and they have to do that in the best way they know how. None of us can take someone else and tell them how to walk their spiritual path. They have to figure that out. The other thing I'm working very hard to become is nothing. And that may sound a little weird, but I'd like to ask y'all, before you judge that term too harshly, to spend an hour and a half of your lives watching The Man of Tai Chi. It's a kind of a cheesy martial arts movie with a rather violent premise. But at the end of the movie, not Keanu Reeves, the gentleman that plays Tiger Chen, I can't believe I forgot his name. Anyway, the hero of the movie finally realizes that he has become nothing, and at that point overcomes himself. And that is the point that I strive to reach, where I haven't just mastered everything around me, but where I have overcome myself. To become nothing means to be truly selfless, to abandon the prejudices and judgments and all of the ego problems that we have walking through this life, to leave the lightest possible footprint, to leave no mark behind us, and one day to transcend this physical existence, to fully embrace the Buddha nature and to become perfected. I'd love to not come back to this existence again if there is an enlightened state that involves not having to go through the suffering that we all go through in this life. If there's something better at the end, I'd love to see what that is. And I'd like to put myself in a condition where I'm ready to see that, even if I don't know what it is yet. It's an interesting thought. See, the fact of the matter is, it isn't until we lose ourselves that we can really become the spiritual person that we were born to be. We can't master either the teachings of the Guandao or Tai Chi Chuan until we stop trying to be the ego person that we put in front of the world. It's for that reason that both the teachings of the Guandao and Shan Cang Feng teach the reduction of the ego self and the simplification of life. The simplification and reduction, the conservation of motion, and the importance of being present in that current moment, Those are fundamental principles to both disciplines. I'd encourage y'all not to be too terribly worried about what everybody else thinks about what you're doing. It's remarkably easy to find an audience of haters out there somewhere. In fact, Derek and I know a couple of people who make an unending hobby out of flaming the two of us for our teachings. And, you know, if we were concerned about that, we'd have to shut this meeting down and go home. But the simple fact of the matter is, to the very best of our ability, the only thing we're offering you guys is the truth. And if somebody else doesn't like that, the only thing we can do is invite them to listen or invite them to go away. We can't make them change who or what they are or what they do. And trying to do that's only frustrating. And so we seek to become nothing, to be invisible, to do what it is we need to do, and then remove ourselves, to not leave that footprint or that mark. That's kind of the goal. I sure hope that something I said today was helpful or useful to someone, and I appreciate your letting me share with you. Thank you.
Bill, thank you. Hey, Bill, when you talked about that first phone conversation we had back in 1997, that always kind of takes me back because the year is now 2017, which means we first spoke 20 years ago.
Yes.
That's
it's been a while.
It's been a while. And by the way, I did watch Man of Tai Chi. No, I'm thinking that, hey, I don't remember that part about becoming nothing. I should probably watch that again.
It's the very end of the movie when Keanu Reeves' character shows up to settle the score, as it were.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah,
it's right at the very end of the movie. The best part.
Cool. I remember the fight choreography was just amazing, and maybe that's what I focused on too much. And I remember one of the points being made by Tiger Chan's character was that people usually assume Tai Chi to be like a passive thing, to be just for exercise. That he hoped to showcase the other side of it, the very active and dynamic and powerful part of Tai Chi, and I think he certainly did. By the way, there's a. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, please.
Let me just kind of share with everyone the backstory behind how that movie came to be. Keanu Reeves, growing up, his dad was part Chinese and Hawaiian. His his paternal grandmother was half Chinese and half Hawaiian. So, which means I think he himself is like 1/8 Chinese. So he always had growing up, he always had a connection with the culture, with the food, with all things Chinese. Anyhow, now people don't automatically assume that about him because he doesn't look it, but that's definitely part of him. Now, when he was making the Matrix movies, he naturally gravitated toward the stunt coordinator, the team, the stunt team. They were mostly Chinese, and that's because the Matrix movie wanted to be different from all the other action movies that was before, in that they wanted the choreography to be very Hong Kong style. And they also wanted to incorporate some of the wire fu, which Hong Kong cinema, Hong Kong martial arts movies were known for. Very dynamic, very cinematic. So he became good friends
with Tiger Chen, who worked on the movie. So the two of them, would hang out and chat about life and whatnot. And at some point, the conversation topic drifted toward, hey, dude, we should like totally make a movie, and it could be this, it could be that. So they threw some ideas back and forth. Now, later on, past the Matrix movies, the timing was right. They rounded up the production, the funding for the movie, and ended up making that movie. So that's how we see the movie taking shape. Keanu Reeves as the bad guy, Tiger Chen as the main character.
Yeah, it's very cool, and the philosophy and the practices are pretty much right on.
Yeah, and you just watching that movie, that whenever they needed to make sure something was authentic, they would go right back to Tiger Chen and said, hey, can we say it like this? Is this the correct way to say it? Stuff like that. So there's nothing quite like getting it directly from the source.
Yeah, it was very cool. It really was. And Aaron sat here and watched it with me, and every time he'd do something, Aaron would go, "You do that. You do that. You just taught me how to do that." He's a Wudong stylist.
Right. That is so cool, and to see these movements that you've been practicing all your life, being shown on the big screen, you probably got a big kick out of it.
Absolutely, but it was really fun to watch Aaron watching it.
Excellent. I think you probably because of your background and experience, I think you probably appreciated the work they put into the choreography even more than most of us.
I don't know, maybe. I definitely understand what it takes to get there.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So, I have a quick comment from Mike. Mike says, "I always feel as if I'm becoming. Is there a point where one is on the Tao path?"
I think we were all born on the Tao path. I don't think that's the issue. I think I've never gotten to the point where I said I'm there.
Yeah, so no matter what it is, no matter what the path is that you are currently following, you've got some kind of path in life. Now, the idea in Tao cultivation is not necessarily to, quote unquote, get on the Tao path. The idea is to say that, well, of all the possible paths that I can take in life, and the possibilities just kind of branch out in front of you, almost too many to count. Of all the possibilities, what can I do? How can I direct myself to get on a better path or the best path possible for me? So that's the reason why Bill has done everything that he has done in his life. He has sought out the practice of martial techniques. He has pursued and quested for Tao wisdom, all of which is to basically guide himself on a better path. Is this all that there is? Is there nothing more to life? What else can I do? What more can I do to maximize this opportunity that I have in this world? Let's go ahead and do the meeting ending ritual, everybody. 起立，面向佛堂，持架三鞠躬，一鞠躬，再鞠躬，三鞠躬，持架各位顶传十一鞠躬，斜翻一鞠躬。We're done, everybody. Thank you so much.